It's just something that I think as a group, I'm just letting you know I notice it, and it means a lot to me. So, okay. We are starting today. It's sort of unfortunate. We just spent the last 4 days really, in yeshiva we would say, ligging and learning. We've been working in the sugyas of Yevamos, the beginning of Yevamos, and Reuven and Shimon and Levi and Tsaros, and how many wives, and how does Zika work, and what happens when there's a Yibum, and now you have an Eishas Achim. We feel like we're, to a certain extent, I'm sure we could all use a review every once in a while, but we're really living in these ideas. And now the Gemara is going to go off on a tangent, and not just like a standard tangent of a half a daf or something. 5 daf. 5 days. We are almost not going to talk about Yevamos at all. We're not going to discuss Reuven, Shimon, Levi. They're going to take a nap. They're going to go in there. We're not going to need them. We might need the board for something else, but this whole concept of what happens if he dies, and it's going to feel like we're learning a different Masechta for the next 5 daf. The intro to the next 5 daf, the topic is roughly going to be the same. It's called something called Asay Dochalos Asay. So this does need a little bit of an explanation. There are some concepts that are very local to the Masechta you're learning. Yevamos is local to Yevamos. If you're in the middle of learning Chagiga, you may not hear the word Yavama. The concept there's no crossover. There are other things that are like Shas topics. Shas topics are like things that just seem to show up everywhere. One of the Shas topics might be a Kal V'chomer. A Kal V'chomer is something that will show up in every single Masechta, no matter where you go. And if you don't understand what a Kal V'chomer is, do you need help with a Kal V'chomer? No. I'm going to tell you, you know what a Kal V'chomer is. Okay, so Kal V'chomer.
How much more so?
Yes, exactly. Right. A protearia, I don't know what the Latin is, whatever. Yeah, you know that famous thing in the English. I don't know. I'm sure does the article translate a Kal V'chomer that way? I have no clue.
Off a tongue?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So the point is if in this case that it's true, then for sure in this case it's true. Meaning that's Kal V'chomer. That's a Shas topic. There's sugyas about how to learn Kal V'chomers. Do we learn Kal V'chomers from this place to that place? It's a big sugya. There are many Shas topics that are like that. One of the Shas topics that are like that, you guys may have heard, it's mitzvah strichas kavana. We've already seen it come up a couple of times. When you do a mitzvah, does it need kavana? Does it not need kavana? Another one might be, were mitzvahs given for hana or mitzvahs not given for hana? There are many, mitzvah haba ba'aver, many Shas topics. Today, we're starting to talk about, and we'll be talking for the next 5 days about an important idea that it's good to get it down now, and we'll get it clearer as we go through. And it's something called Asay doche los asay. Let's just translate the words. Asay is referring to the mitzvahs asay, right? We have positive commandments and we have negative commandments. So positive commandments like put on tzitzis, put on tefillin. Yeah, these are positive commandments. Shake a lulav. Asay, do it. It's a positive act of a commandment. This is, every morning you put on tefillin, you're doing a mitzvah asay. When you put a smile on your face and you say good morning to the rabbi, you're doing a mitzvah asay of chesed, or whatever you want to call it. There are positive commandments in the Torah, and they're real. There's a positive mitzvah commandment. And then there are negative commandments. What's a classic example of a negative commandment?
Don't steal.
Don't this, don't. Anything that starts in the Hebrew in the English with don't. That's a lo saseh. Anything that starts with a do, that's a positive. I mean, that's the simple. Now, there are exceptions, but for our sake, for now, we're going to keep it nice and simple. Now, if I were to ask you, which one of those two do you think is more strict? Meaning, which one do you have to be more careful? I'll use just one example. The halacha is that a person has to give up his entire fortune to avoid doing a lo saseh. If the Torah says don't do something, don't wear shatnez. Don't wear shatnez. Lo saseh in the Torah. Don't break Shabbos. A person is not allowed to say, well, hefsid meruba, it's a lot of money. We don't care. However, that's not true for a mitzvah saseh. There's a limit. I'm not exactly sure what the number is. I forgot off the top of my head, but there's a limit how far a person has to do, how much money a person has to lose in order to not do an asay. Remember, an asay is doing it. So there are areas where an asay is certainly lighter than a lo asay. Punishment. If a person doesn't do a mitzvah asay, we don't punish you. Hashem's going to get you. You should have done it. You didn't do it. Not wearing tefillin, we don't send you to Bezdin. You don't get hit. None of that, right?
The next 5 feet, I'm saying the next 5.
And why do we do it by a bris?
So bris and Pesach. There's a couple of he's saying a person doesn't.
I say why does Bezdin enforce a bris?
Oh, I thought you were talking about something else. I thought you were talking about the fact that there's a Yechayiv Kares for Pesach and for bris.
Say why do they cut my?
No. So midrabanan, there are going to be times that we will enforce it, but it's not minat Torah. Meaning the idea that you get malchus, for instance, when a person, I don't know, let's say a person wears shatnez, or shatnez is a good example because it's going to come up on today's daf. But or if a person breaks Shabbos, we kill him. I mean, a person sleeps with an erva, which we saw, Yechayv Kares, maybe Misa. We have real punishments for these things, and the more severe the avera, the more severe the punishment. Now, even though in Hashkafa we say generally it's not our job to tell Hashem we like this mitzvah, we don't like that mitzvah, and that's certainly true, but we still have to deal with the mitzvahs as they're given to us, and there certainly is a spectrum or a gradient along which there's more severe and more severe averas, and it certainly starts on the most severe side with things like the Gimel Averos, not killing someone, not Gilei Arayas and Shvichas Damim and Avodah Zarah. Those are the three big ones, right? And then maybe lighter than that might be breaking Shabbos. Then slightly lighter than that might be not eating kosher. And which type of not eating kosher is pig worse than eating? There is a certain system or a structure that we work within, and all the way at the end it might be. Hashem says tie your left shoe before your right shoe, and if you didn't do that, how bad is that? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but no one's going to kick you out of the community if you didn't tie your left shoe before your right shoe. But maybe if you start walking around with McDonald's in your mouth, they might be like, hey, are you part of our community? Meaning, to a certain extent, we understand that there's a severity to mitzvahs and averos. And within that context, you would think that if you have a choice, if somehow a certain circumstance would come up where one action would contain within it both a mitzvah saseh, that by doing it, you're accomplishing a mitzvah saseh, and at the same time, by doing it, you're also being over on a lo saseh. What would be a classic example is Mila on Shabbos. Halacha is you have to mal your kid. On the 8th day, there's a mitzvah to give him a bris Mila as long as he's healthy. Now, do we do Mila on Shabbos? Yes, we absolutely do Mila on Shabbos. Now, Mila maybe is an exception because Mila you get a kares. Maybe that's a special mitzvah saseh. But just for the purpose of just the demonstration of the idea, if you don't do, basically,
we can show for on Shabbos with the rice as long as we're upon it that we don't do it.
That's true, correct. There we do. We but the only reason why you can't do shofar on Shabbos is because of the Rabbanan. Meaning, min Torah, there's no malacha. But like, for instance, let's use Mila as an example. I'm allowed to, not only am I allowed, it's a mitzvah for me to do Mila on Shabbos, but I'm not allowed to, for instance, once Mila is a mutter, what if I feel like he has a pimple? I'm going to take the pimple off too. That's a problem. Can't do that. That's certainly usher on Shabbos. You're chayiv skila for that. There's nothing to talk about. Meaning, there's a special heter, and this may start to sound a little bit like Yevamos, right? You can understand where the topic starts coming up here. Because what does the Torah say? The Torah says you can't have bia, you can't have relations with your brother's wife. It's a kares. You chayiv kares if you do. The vlad is mamzer, the baby's a mamzer. And yet there's a mitzvah in the Torah called yibum. So there's a mitzvah called yibum, and there's an avera called erva with your brother's wife. And yet the Torah, in one breath, took those two things and said, this thing, the aseh, is going to do something to the los aseh. It's clearly not relevant in this moment. There's a discussion in deeper lumdis. Does it mean that it's like the Torah never even said the avera in this situation? Or is it just that it pushes it off temporarily? That's a discussion, not for now, but something to think about as we sort of go through Yevamos. Constantly, do we understand that the avera is completely not said, or that's a deeper conversation? But for our sake, we need to understand that there's positive commandments called the mitzvah aseh, do, and then there's a mitzvah lo aseh. Let's give a couple of examples just to wrap our head around what we mean. So let's say we're talking about Shabbos, Mila. That's a perfect example. Hashem said, don't spill blood on Shabbos. Netilas neshama on Shabbos is asur. It's one of the lamates malachos. Min haTorah, if I go ahead and I take a scalpel to my hand on Shabbos and I do this, I've just chayiv skila. If I do it on purpose and there's Adam sitting me, they say, hey, you can't do that. And I do it, my own blood, your blood, whatever it is, I'm chayiv. If I kill a bug on Shabbos, maybe a bug, I'm not 100% sure. It depends on the bug, depends on the situation. But generally speaking, if I kill an animal, I shecht an animal on Shabbos, major problems. However, meal is okay. And what about avod in the Beis HaMikdash? Avod in the Beis HaMikdash. On Shabbos, every Shabbos we bring a musaf. We say it every Shabbos. We shechted that musaf. That carbon musaf had to be shechted. So yet, on Shabbos.
That
now,
blows my mind that you can, in the basement, you're doing malacha
on Shabbos. Absolutely. 100%.
I'm saying, like,
What's that?
The whole Shabbos is based on the
Talmud every single day, obviously. Yeah, twice.
Fire's burning 24/7.
Fire's burning 24/7. That's
And
the
you
difference.
just smoke that fire?
This is another example of the question going across. I'm okay with it, but the cross conversation makes it hard.
No.
Okay.
Continue.
No, it's okay. I don't mind. The question's good.
I know.
It's hard for me to answer if I'm.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Isn't
So
that where we learned a lot
from the Mishkan, correct? Yes. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So that's one example. Another example. The example we're going to see today. Let's get familiar with it because we're going to need to see it pretty much the whole daf. Shatnez. What is shatnez? Does anyone know what shatnez is? It is a hope. You know what it is. Correct. That's how we come to understand it. But it's actually a little bit more complex than that. Shatnez is a subcategory of something called kilayim, which Rabbi is going to get to very soon in the Mishnayos. Kilayim is basically mixing up of different categories of things. There's kilayim of animals. Certain, you're not allowed to, like a mule, to take two animals. But what do they call it? A liger. You know what a liger is? It's a lion with a tiger. That's to a certain extent an example of kilayim. You're taking crossbreeding.
Fruits and vegetables.
I'm not saying it's actually kilayim. I'm just using it as an example.
An animal that's not kilayim. An animal kilayim is plowing together.
That's another form of kilayim. Yeah. There's 5 different types of forms of kilayim. We'll get to the Mishnayos, we'll get to it. One of the forms of kilayim is shatnez. It's a specific subcategory within kilayim. And it's specifically wool and linen garments can't be mixed together. We're not going to spend a ton of time in the halacha of that. They're very complicated halachas, when they apply, when they don't. We'll touch on it a little bit on the second half of today's daf. But just from our perspective, understand, the Torah says you can't wear shatnez. This is a very clear black and white aveira in the Torah. It's a los essay. It's a regular, normal los essay. Like the Torah says, don't wear shatnez. Pretty straightforward. The Torah also says that if you have a beged, if you have a garment that has 4 corners, you have to wear tzitzis. We all have them probably hanging from the sides of our, unless you're a shirt tuck-in guy, right? Your tzitzis are, what are your tzitzis made of? Like, if I have a beged made of wool or a beged made of linen, what am I supposed to do? Am I allowed to make the tzitzis strings out of wool? Can I have woolen strings attached to my linen beged?
Well, they have tzitzis like that.
Of course they are. Yeah. But now why? Meaning shatnez. What happened to shatnez? And the answer is because asay is doche los asay. This concept is the basis for that reality. Tcheles has to be made from wool. Now, we don't happen to have the chilos on fish, so we don't wear tcheles unless you have the opinion. You're of the opinion that we have. Whatever your opinion is there. The point is, it's clear that tcheles is made of wool. If tcheles is made of wool and you're putting tcheles on a beged, and if I'm walking around in a 4-cornered beged made of linen, then
why should the tcheles affect the wool?
Once you're attaching the strings, which have the
tcheles is a dye. You're still using the same material.
Yeah, but the tcheles dye has to be onto the wool. You're right, correct. Meaning when we say tcheles, it means tcheles is only on a wool, only on a piece of wool. That means I have a wool string attached to a linen beged. So how does that work? That's shatnez. So I'm just going to keep this clear. I don't want to go off on a tangent. But asay is doche los asay. Now, one important concept that we won't see until like Zion, Vav Zion, is in order for us to say asay doche los asay, the act of the asay and the act of the los asay have to be not close, they have to be the exact same thing. The language of the Gemara, it's called be'idna, at the moment. So for instance, let's say I told you the mitzvah of Yibum was only when at the end of the biyah. And this is an example. Imagine I told you the act of sex, there's a start to the act, and then there's a finish to the act. Imagine I told you the aveira was only in the beginning. And let's say I told you that the mitzvah of Yibum is the end. You might say, sex is sex. Not true. It has to literally be at the exact moment. The moment you're being over on the aveira is the moment Hashem says you've just been makayim the mitzvah. Hashem says, asay is doche los asay. In that moment. Now, I'll just mention one idea that's discussed. The Rabbi Akiva brings it later. It's a quote of the Ramban al HaTorah, which is very unlike the Achronim on the daf to quote a Ramban al HaTorah in the middle of the Gemara. The Ramban al HaTorah actually talks about this idea of mitzvah asay doche los asay, which is a little bit of a strange idea. Why would you think that a mitzvah asay, which if you don't do it, we don't kill you, we don't give you kares, that will push off something where we do punish you? Los asay, you give you malchus. So l'chora, an asay is a very light level of a mitzvah. A los asay is a much more stringent level of a mitzvah, right? And what do we say? A blind person's paturim in a mitzvah is only patur for mitzvah asay. A woman, she's patur for mitzvah asay, she's mangrama. But all of the los asay, she's chayavin. Meaning los asay is certainly more chomer, more stringent. And yet we're letting a mitzvah asay, this is like David knocking out Goliath. It doesn't make sense, right? So what we'll have to sort of understand as we sort of go through the Gemara, the Ramban says the following idea. He says, even though in punishment an asay is weaker, in the nature of the avodas Hashem required to do that mitzvah, it's higher. Because in the language of the Ramban, and there's a deep idea which I'm not going to express, he says that a mitzvah asay is from ahava, You do positive things out of love, and you don't do things out of fear, out of
Active
fear.
commission versus active omission.
Correct.
So-
It's like your wife won't be upset at you as much if you just didn't mention the thing.
Right.
Whereas if you went out of your way, exactly, it's the exact same idea. Meaning, even though we're not going to punish you for not wearing tzitzis, in fact, tzitzis is a unique scenario. You don't actually have a mitzvah to wear tzitzis.
Only if you're in
It's a circumstantial mitzvah. If you happen to not be, if you're in the shower, you don't have a chiyuv to go find your waterproof tzitzis.
You don't wear it at night.
You don't wear it when you swim. If it's a bazillion to the tzitzis when you're playing ball, take it off. I mean, some people don't, but some people have a special tzitzis for playing ball. But you don't have a. I mean, it's a circumstantial mitzvah. Even tefillin is a more of a. And yet we still say that circumstantial mitzvah is enough of a mitzvah in the moment you put the tzitzis on. And think about it. Why is that? It's because when I'm being mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis, when I take the bag and I put it on, the second it's rested on my shoulders, I've just been mekayim the mitzvah. Now it happens to be I'm mekayim mitzvah every 2 seconds. I'm wearing it. When am I over on shatnez? That exact moment. Meaning, if let's say the aveira for shatnez was, I don't know, tying it or something, then it wouldn't be a problem.
Does it have to last the same way, like tzitzis? You get it every
It's a very
second?
good question. Very good
Because
question.
On Shabbos, once you've done the act of cutting, you're not.
Correct.
doing anything.
Yeah, so that's going to come up a little bit later on. Is what do we say if, let's say, and it's not exactly the same thing, but it touches on the philosophy behind it, is how do we understand it if, let's say, for tzitzis, am I allowed to wear tzitzis at night if it's shatnez? Right? Because at that moment in time, I don't have a mitzvah to wear it at night. So now all of a sudden, the garment during the day that I have a heter to wear because it's tzitzis, well, now what happens when the mitzvah goes away? Meaning I can't make a second cut. I can't continue cutting on Shabbos, right? Once I do that first milah, I can't be like, well, I think you could use a surgery too. So you can't do that, right? You can't. Okay, so we're going to get to those ideas. So this is a little bit of a hakdama to say, and the Gemara is going to say, remember, let's come off the Gemara we just learned before. 2 seconds ago in our Gemara, really yesterday, we learned what's the makar, what's the source for the mitzvah yibum that we say that if Leah is a what do you call it? She's an erva, a daughter, a sister, whatever it is. What's the source that we say we don't do the mitzvah yibum in that case? So says the Gemara inside. Daf Gimel Amud Beis on the bottom, 7 lines on the bottom. Taima, the reason why we don't do yibum with an erva is the Kasav Rachmana Aleha, because just above on Amud Beis we had a whole long drasha. We learned out from Sukkim. From Achos Isha, from your wife's sister, from Aleha, we had a whole Zerushav over there, whatever it was, teaching us that you don't do the mitzvah ibum, which is mashma, that had you not the pasuk halav, you would have said what? Havamina Achos Isha miyabemes. You'd have a havamina that a man, a brother, who now his wife's sister is falling to him, or any one of the ervas are falling to him, I'd have a havamina to do it. Again, the Gemara said we learned it out from Sukkim that you don't do it, which is mashma. Right? The implication is that had the Torah not explicitly said, don't do yibum with your wife's sister, the Torah's understanding would have been, you do it, which means you have the mitzvah saseh of yibum coming up against an erva, not just wife's brother erva. This is an external erva. And it's mashma from the Gemara that had I not had a pasuk to tell me not to do it, I would have done it. Asked the Gemara, why? My taima, is it because of this rule we just introduced, that we take positive commandments and push off negative commandments, and that's why this would have worked? And it's only because the pasuk says the Gemara, that's a problem. Why? Because let's start getting into the rules of when do we say asay dochelose asay los asay greda? Only when the los asay is a regular, normal, run-of-the-mill los asay, as compared to Lo sesei sheyesh b'ikares mitachi, but if the lo sesei is so stringent, I said before, the asay is though for the lo sesei, ava pushes zero, all the wonderful Hasidic Torah you're going to say, but at the end of the day, says the Gemara, the rule of an asay, a positive commandment, pushing off a lo sesei, a negative commandment, is only said when that lo sesei isn't up here.
Less stringent.
A regular, normal run-of-the-mill lo sesei, like shatnez, like Shabbos, maybe not. Shabbos is skila. Right? So you see that this lo sesei concept maybe doesn't always apply. Says the Gemara, this would be a case where we'd be saying yibum should push off.
I'm saying
Yibum should push off being with your wife's sister or your daughter or your mother-in-law. What do you mean, mother-in-law, daughter, sister? These are kareses. These are major averas. Who says the asay kibidocha the lo sesei? 1 second. So the Gemara is asking, Why do I need a pasuk to tell me you shouldn't do it? Why? Because I would have said asay say. You wouldn't have said asay say in this situation. Pause. What?
No, just I was bringing proof of I say from shotness and whatever.
We're going to do it today, yeah?
No, I'm saying, are we comparing it? Are we going to come back to bring it to?
Yes. Okay. So yes. So like I was trying to say before, it's a 5-daf Gemara.
Where is that rule known from? That only during the case we say I said that.
So that's the Gemara's literally here.
It's
Yevamos.
bringing in the concept now, or is he bringing it from somewhere else?
It's based on observation throughout all of Shas, but so this is the interesting thing. We're going to ask two questions. So the first question is, why do I need a drasha? I would have anyways not said asay let's say because it's a kares. Let's just work for a second and assume that that's just known. Second question, visu, an additional question. Lo say greda. This idea of asay say minol and the 1 second. Let's take a step back. How do I even know it works? So the Gemara is clearly introducing the whole concept of asay say. It starts off by saying that why would I have thought you can have yibum with your sister-in-law, right? With your wife's sister. I would have said because of asay say. But asay doesn't work by a kares. Park that question for a moment, says the Gemara. And even if it did, how does it even work? That's the Gemara's two questions. The two questions really have nothing to do with each other. Question number one is, assuming asay say is a true thing and it works, I assume it only works by a regular lav, regular lo saseh. Then the Gemara, completely separate question, is asking, where do we even know that lo saseh is pushed off from an asay? Now the Gemara is going to spend a daf and a half answering second question, completely ignoring the first question, and we'll eventually, on Daf Zayin, we're holding on Daf Dalet today, on Daf Zayin, we're going to come back to the first question. So I almost don't even want to address your question because everything it's saying is much relevant to that for Daf Zayin.
I'm back to that.
Exactly. So now, what are we going to do from now till Daf Zayin? We're going to address the second question. Where do we actually know the general concept of asay say from? Says the Gemara, we're going to learn it from Sukkim. And I'm just going to say out loud what we're going to do today on the daf and say it very simply. The Gemara is going to say that we're going to learn it from shatnez and tzitzis, like I said before. Shatnez is a regular asay, tzitzis is a regular asay. We'll learn from here that since the Torah says I can put tzitzis on my beged that is made of linen, even though it's wool, the wool and linen going together is going to be pushed away for the mitzvahs tzitzis. Now, that idea is going to be based off, it's not going to be like a mefurish pasuk in the Torah, it's going to be based off a concept called smuchim. Meaning, normally we talk about gezerah shavas, and we talk about kal v'chomers, we talk about all these different homiletic techniques we'll use to learn something out. Smuchim is a lighter, it's a lighter idea. Smuchim basically means I can make a drasha that says, well, if the Torah put this and this next to each other, they juxtapose two ideas, that's enough for me to automatically assume that the halakha is true.
Intentional in the Torah.
Of course, everything's intentional. So now the question is, can I assume juxtaposition is, that's not one of the 13 midas that we use for drashas. We usually say, the Torah says it over here by this, and there's an extra word. The extra word we say. If it's out of place, that's something, right? But juxtaposition, is that enough? Called smuchin. This is a discussion, a major discussion, not just here, in many places. But the idea of smuchin is a question. It's machlokus, we'll say Gemara. But regardless, the pasuk of shatnez and tzitzis is in dvarim, and we'll see that even the opinion who holds that smuchin are normally not learned in the rest of the Torah, in dvarim it is. And a big part of that has something to do with the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote dvarim, versus the other 4 books written by Hashem, whatever that means. And on some level, there is some, we're going to provide like an idea that says that in Dvarim, because Moshe wrote it, we can assume he wrote it with that intent. Whereas Hashem, when he gave the Torah, that intent was not necessarily, or it's a question if it was even put into the Torah that way. However, how we get to that idea, I don't know, but yeah.
How do you rely on smuchim? Anytime it doesn't work, we say that there's no order for the Torah.
Yeah, so it's a challenge. Smuchim is a very difficult concept. I think at the end of the day, it's going to fundamentally come down to Masorah, and then the smuchim is going to sort of be almost like something we hang it on. But complicated. But either way, from smuchim, we're going to learn out that Shabbos is going to be mutter when you're doing tzitzis. The Gemara is then going to say on Amud Beis, wait 1 second. After we finish proving that the smuchim is going to tell it to us, maybe we wouldn't have learned that. So that's really effectively what we're going to do, but we're going to go back and forth in psukim. Okay, says the Gemara. Top of Dalet Amud Aleph. Dichsiv. What's the pasuk that tells me asay is doichelois asay? The pasuk says it's in Re'eh, which is important to know. It's in Dvarim. Lo silbash shatnez. And the very next pasuk, this is smuchin, right? Gidilim ta'asa lecha. So the first pasuk, lo silbash shatnez, is don't wear shatnez. The second pasuk says gidilim ta'asa lecha putzitzis. So we darshan smuchim to mean that don't wear shatnez unless you're putting tzitzis on it. then you can wear shatnez. Meaning what? Asay docha los asay. Says the Gemara of Amr Abelazar, Somchin Smuchin min haTorah minayin. How do I know that I can even make this drasha called smuchin of juxtaposition? Shenamar, the pasuk says in Tehillim, it's a drasha here. Smuchim la'ad la'olam. All of smuchim are forever. It's referring to something else in the context, but for our sake, we're making a drasha. Asuyim be'emes v'yasher. You can rely on smuchim. So therefore, Lo Sil Bashanis Gedim Mutasalach tells you that you wear tzitzis even when it's shatnez. And I say techelitzis. If Amr Sheshes, Amr Rebelazar, Mishum Rebelazar ben Azariah, Minayin li Yevamos shenafel lifnei muka shchin shein chos min osa. We're mentioning once we're talking about smuchin, the idea that we darshan, we learn things from their juxtaposition in the Torah. He asks a question, and happens to be talking about Yevamos, but really this has nothing to do with Yevamos. How do I know that if Reuven and Shimon are brothers and Shimon dies, leaving over a wife? Let's say his wife, her name is Rachel, and Rachel is a very pretty lady, and Shimon was a very handsome man, and Shimon happens to have a brother, looks a little bit like Dr. Jekyll, or Mr. Hyde, whichever one was the monster, yeah? And all of a sudden, Minayin Yevama, how do we know the halacha is that if she falls the Yibam to Reuven, right, Shimon dies, and now she was just married to, some beautiful looking man, and now she's falling to this guy with psoriasis all over his face. He's got nasty looking. He's a very ugly man. Not just not good looking. He's got some major, lesions on his face. How do we know that we don't keep her quiet? Meaning, how do we know that we listen to her? Meaning, we allow her to say, "Hey, I have no interest in this guy. This guy's a real disgusting guy. I have no interest in this." How do we know that that's the case? Says the Gemara from Smuchin. Shenamar, the pasuk says, "Lo yisachsam shar b'dishay." The halacha is if you're threshing your animal, you're not allowed to muzzle the animal. You have to let it eat from the food that it's threshing. V'samichlei, and immediately next to it, there's a juxtaposition of a pasuk of Yibum, of Kiyesh v'Ach Miachtav. Contextually, they have nothing to do with each other, but since they're right next to each other in the psukim, we darshan smuchim to teach me that there's a mitzvah Yibum, that mitzvah Yibum will not apply when there's a scenario of muzzling, meaning don't muzzle her. That's how the Gemara understands it. Therefore, you got to let her decide that, hey, I don't want to be with this ugly guy. So this is just an example of smuchim. Again, the concept of smuchim, the juxtaposition of the psukim, is what's teaching me that the mitzvah of tzitzis is said even when it's shatnez, meaning lo saseh is going to be pushed off because of an
We
aseh.
hold like this?
We do hold like this, yes. V'amar Rav Yosef, afilu leman delo darish smuchim ba'alma, says Rav Yosef. This whole concept of asay docha lo saseh is being learned from tzitzis with shatnez, which is based on smuchim. And like I said earlier, smuchim is not something that everyone always agrees with. Says Rav Yosef, even the opinion who holds you don't say smuchim in general will agree that the Mishnah Torah Darish, he does say smuchim. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm not 100% sure exactly the mechanism why Dvarim is exactly different. Maybe it's because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it, maybe it's something else. But either way, says the Gemara, even that opinion would say that he darshan smuchim, meaning to say, since the pasuk of Shatnez and Tzitzis is in Dvarim, everyone will hold of that smuch. Everyone will hold of that juxtaposition. In which case, then we have a makar, we have a source for asay dechilesasay. Now, who are these people who hold and don't hold? The Rabbi Yehuda ba'alma darish. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of smuchim in general. Ube Mishnah Torah darish, but in Dvarim he does do it. Ube alma minol delay darish. Let me show you where I know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan smuchim. He doesn't think juxtaposition is a makar for halacha. How do I see that in general? This is a parsha. I don't know what parsha it is, but it's in Shmos. I'm thinking Mishpat. I'm not sure. The Tanya Ben Azai Omer, the Brisa says as follows. Ben Azai says, Mechashefa lo yitzchaya. Mechashefa is a sorceress, a person who does like black magic. So the halacha is lo yitzchayo. You shall not let her live. We take her to Bezdin and we kill her. But it does not tell me how we kill her. Do we give her skila, hereg, chenek, Sreifa? What do we do to her?
Burn her at the stake.
Maybe in Salem, but now over here it says over here Mechashefa. We don't know exactly what it means. Lo yitzchaya. So how do we kill her? So we learn from smuchim. It says Ben Namar, Ben Azai says kol shoychavim behema mos yumas. Nearby in the psukim it tells us what happens when a person sleeps with an animal. Yeah, we certainly kill the animal, but we certainly kill the person. It's chaya misa, and it happens to be that we know the halacha is that it's skila. You give skila to such a person. So since you give skila there, we'll understand smuchim to teach me that since it's juxtaposed to the same idea, they're juxtaposed to each other, even though they have nothing to do with each other, that if it's going to be skila with an animal, it's also going to be skila when we say a sorceress. Says the Gemara, that's the shita of Ben Azai. So he holds of smichos, and this smichos is in shmos, so clearly not in dvarim. However, Amarle Rabbi Yehuda, the one we're looking to find that he doesn't hold of smichos in general, says, you're telling me juxtaposition is enough that you're going to say that we're going to give her the worst of the four misos one can get? Who says that she gets skila? Maybe she gets reifa, maybe she gets the other ones. Says the Gemara, Ella, Rabbi Yehuda says, what's the reason? He agrees in halacha that she does get skila, but not from smuchin, from a different thing. Ella oivi yedoni, who were spelled out as two examples of sorceresses or certain types of black magic, where they would like chew on a bone and talk to the bone, they would talk to the dead, whatever it is. There was a certain black magic that oivi yedoni, that was what it was called. So when people would do that, it said specifically over there, they are bichlal machshefim, they were sorcerers. And velama yatsu, why did those cases of Ovi Yidoni, why were they explicitly mentioned? And it was mentioned over there that they get skila. Lahakish lahem, v'loimer lach. It's in order to make a hekish. Ma Ovi Yidoni beskila, af machshev beskila. Meaning to say that Zakti Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda argues with Benazai. The context for us isn't as important as what is he saying. I will not rely on smuchim in that parsha because that's shmos. However, says the Gemara, Mishnah Torah, where do we see that Rabbi Yehuda agrees we do say smuchin? Mishnah Torah minol and darish. So this is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Again, we're trying to see that he holds of smuchim when it's in dvarim. It's going to be a little bit of a conversation, but let's see. The Tanan, there's a Mishnah. It's actually a Mishnah here in Yevamos, in Daf Tzadi Zayin. No say adam anusas aviv umefutas aviv. What's anusas aviv umefutas aviv? If your father has an extramarital affair, mefutas aviv means it's voluntary, and anusas aviv means it's not voluntary, meaning he forced her. But the point is, let's say he does that. So he has sex with another woman, not his wife. Okay? Now, if a man had sex with a woman that is not his wife, what is the halacha? Is his son allowed to be with her? Is his son allowed to marry her? Are you allowed to marry your father's mistress? That's effectively the Gemara's question. She's not an Eishes Ish. She's not an Eishes Ish. She's not married to your father. She's not your mother. She's just a woman. She's a lady of the night. And your father has them.
You say it's normally an arayas.
Meaning when they're married, it's an arayas. They're not married. It's just they shared a bed. Are you now allowed to marry her or not? So it says the Gemara like this. The Mishnah later on, we'll get to it, says as follows. No say adam anusas aviv and mufutas aviv. Not only that, anusas beno mufutas beno. You're allowed to marry as the father your son's mistress, and the son is allowed to marry the father's mistress. Okay? Because all they've done is had sex. They've not gotten married. There is no ishus. There's no ishus ish. There's no ishus av. There's no imay. There's none of that. All it is just they had a relationship. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree that you can be with your sons, but not your fathers. Anusas aviv u'mefutas aviv, he says it's also. Rabbi Yehuda oiser b'anusas aviv u'mefutas aviv. Your father's extramarital lady on the side. What do they call it? I forget the current kids. What? Mistress, yeah, mistress. Sorry, thank you. I forgot just for a second.
Gumba.
Yeah, Gumba, yeah. Gumba is the guy. I forgot the other term.
Gemara, yeah.
You're Italian, you're Italian. It says the Gemara, my time is the Rabbi Yehuda. What is Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning for saying that a father's mistress you're not allowed to marry? All he did was had sex with her. He didn't marry her. He's not Ishus. He's not listed in Achremos. The pasuk says, and this is in Dvarim, it's in the parashas. Re'eh, the pasuk says, when it's talking about your father's wife, lo yikach ish es eshesav. If a man can't marry his father's wife, meaning let's say his father divorced her or his father died, that woman is usher to him forever. And the pasuk continues and says, v'lo yigala knafav, you shall not reveal the corner of the garment of your father, which is a euphemism, right? Says the Gemara. What does knaf mean? Knaf, the corner, which is the erva shira of it, meaning the corner of the garment your father saw, meaning to say that he took it off, meaning he was with that lady. This woman that he took the corner of her garment off, you can't be with. Meaning to say, the Gemara is basically saying, lo yigala, you can't take that. Meaning you're not allowed to be with such a woman. That is the drush in the Torah. That tells me wonderful that you're not allowed to be with the man that your father was, you're not allowed to be with the woman that your father was with. But who says it's just not saying that it's his wife? Who says it's not someone else? Who says it's talking about a mistress, right, or a rape victim? Says the Gemara, and here's the smuchin part. He says, "Mi lavid the krah," because if you look back, the pasuk right before that, what's the pasuk right before that? The pasuk says, it's the whole parasha of what does someone have to pay to the father of a woman that he raped? He's got to pay 50 shekel. He's got to marry her. He can't divorce her forever. Right? What is it? What's pasuk? Either way, that's the halacha. You got to pay the father 50 shekel. The whole parasha right before that is talking about ones. The very next pasuk says you're not allowed to be with your father's wife, and lo yigala knafav, if you're not allowed to be with the mistress. Says the Gemara. Sorry, so therefore you see Rabbi Yehuda holds of smuchin, because since the two areas are juxtaposed one right next to each other, he starts in smuchim, and this is in dvarim. So let's take a breath for a moment. What are we trying to prove over here? Remember, we're trying to show. I say, where do we know it from? Shatnez. Shatnez is a smuchin. Who holds a smuchin? Everyone holds a smuchin, but Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold a smuchin, but he does in dvarim. How do I know that he holds it in dvarim? Right here, I see that he does hold it in dvarim. We're talking here about why are you not allowed to be with the mistress of your father? Because smuchim,
Pasuk says
and it's in Dvarim. So you see, he holds smuchim in Dvarim. So if he holds smuchim here, he holds smuchim there. Meaning to say, Bein Rabbi Yehuda, Bein the Rabbanan, everyone agrees will hold smuchim. And if that's the case, we have a good, solid source for Asay Dechilas Asay. Says the Gemara, for Rabbanan who say not. You have a question?
One question. Because he holds it in one place in the Torah.
Very good question. It's a very good question. Why would we say that he holds it everywhere else?
consistency.
Yeah.
There's no consistency.
So that's a very good point. The Gemara is going to spend all of Amud Beis explaining why is it in not. Oh, let me say this a little better. Not why in Dvarim. It's really he doesn't hold the smuchim. That's the real answer. The real answer is he doesn't hold the smuchim. He only holds of smuchim when there's something going on that makes the placement strange. And he happens to, all the cases where he does hold it happen to all be in Dvarim. So it's not that there's anything special about Dvarim. That's why I didn't really want to commit to the idea before about Moshe Rabbeinu versus not, because really it's not so clear that that's the reason. It just so happens, now you might want to say that maybe it's because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Dvarim that he put things out of place in order to, okay, you could say that maybe. That's a second level thinking.
Right.
But in terms of the observation, what Gene's asking a very good question. Meaning, just because I did it in one place and therefore every other time in Dvarim is smuchim, why don't I just go open a Dvarim and start putting, maybe it means, look at these two psukim, they're next to each other. That means I can eat to this one.
This, right.
You have to, so obviously it has to be something that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he says smuchim is really not a thing. And you think about it, what was the language he used above? He says, Mipnei shesamchu inyan lo, you're going to give her skila just because the Torah has one word next to the other. That's not enough. You got to give me a reason why there's something to investigate here that I can conclude. So he says, and we'll see that as we go through the rest of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, the Rabbanan who say that you are not allowed to be with your father's mistress, right? Doesn't the Rabbanan learn smuchim? Right? Why would the Rabbanan argue on this? He says, you're right. He says, if it truly was smuchim, kidika amras, I would agree with you, because I do hold the smuchim. But smuchim has to be mamish, the next pasuk. It can't be like, like 4 psukim later, a pasuk later. There can't be anything breaking it up. But here, if you think about it, there is something slightly breaking it up. The last pasuk was talking about anusa. The very next pasuk is the pasuk we read before. What was the pasuk? The pasuk said, it says layikach ishes eshes aviv. That's not talking about his mistress. That's talking about his wife. It's the end of that pasuk that says v'lo yigala knaf aviv. So there is this. Okay, it's very contextual, but the first half of that pasuk is not talking about his mistress. It's talking about his wife. It's all in one pasuk.
Literal
word. So they're arguing over whether it's mamish samach or not. It says the Chachamim. If it would be truly samach kidika amris, however, hashdaloi samach lei, and although normally we don't read the parentheses here, the parentheses help. Hashdaloi samach lei, and why is it not samach? Because the chsiv, it says lo yikach ishes aviv beintayim. It says that in between. Since it says it in between, the lo yigala knaf, which we want to say is a mistress, and the parsha of ones, which is referring to a mefuta and an ones, to put those two together to say the halacha the way Rabbi Yehuda says it, he doesn't want to do. So therefore, he says. So what's this extra pasuk of lo yigala knaf of it talking about? Something completely unrelated. B'shemeres yovam akasav medaber, and I'll just very quickly explain what that means. You have Reuven and Shimon. Shimon has a wife, and Shimon dies. So now Shimon's wife falls to Reuven. What if Reuven has a son? Who is Shimon's wife to Reuven's son? His father's brother's wife. That's an erva. You are not allowed to be with, right? The Ashes Achi of the father's brother's wife. Yes. You cannot be with any of your aunts. The only aunt you're allowed to be with is your mother's husband. No? Yeah, your mother's husband's
mother's sister's husband's sister.
Yeah. There's only 3. There are 3 aunts you can't be with. You can't be with your mother's sister, your father's sister, and your father's brother's wife. But your mother's husband's sister, which would
not
be
really an aunt.
Not really.
You're not related.
You're not
related.
So the 3 aunts are all a problem. I take it back.
Right.
All 3 aunts are a problem.
You said don't use aunt. Don't use
aunt. So thank you. I made my own mistake. Okay. So now what's the Gemara saying? Gemara is saying like this. Who is that woman? That is this guy's father's brother's wife. Now, without the Torah telling me it's also to be with her, I already know it's also to be with her because she's an erva. And parenthetically, she's now a shomeres yavam, and we know she's not allowed to be with anyone other than her brother, other than her husband's brother, other than his father. Meaning she, as a shomeres yavam, can only be with the brother of her dead husband. But on top of that, now says the Gemara, the Chachamim understand the pasuk of lo yigala knaf aviv to be referring to the shomeres yavam for the son. The son is not allowed to be with this woman. Why? Lo yigala knaf aviv. Don't have any sexual interaction with knaf aviv, and knaf aviv is just going to mean the corner of the garment here doesn't actually mean like he's been with her. It means who he will be with, because since he has to do the mitzvah of yibum, therefore you're not supposed to be with her. And says the Gemara, v'lavar Allah b'shnei lav, and it's telling you that you're going to be over on 2 averas. Now I'm just mentioning there's really a third of shemeres yavam being chutz l'shuk, but just leaving that alone, there's an erva of father's brother's wife, and now there's a separate lav of this pasuk. But the point is, for what we need, what we just got out of the entire Amud so far, is that Rabbi Yehuda will agree to the Chachamim in general that we darshan smuchim when it's in Parshas Dvarim. That's all we need. I say the Chalei say from Tzitzis, which is in Dvarim, everyone holds a smuchim over there. Says the Gemara, Ube Mishnah Torah, my time in the Darish. Once we're mentioning smuchim here, why is it exactly in Mishnah Torah that we actually do the drasha? Now you might answer, what do you mean? Because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it. So that's my point. My point is the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says a whole slew of reasons why. Now the answer is going to be very simple. We're going to see 2 ideas. There's something called muchach and something called mufne. In English, muchach means it's got to be, and mufne means it's available. Meaning to say, we're going to find the pasuk that they're smuchim that are next to each other. So either it's at a place, it doesn't belong where it is, or it's in place, but there's something about where it is that's extra. Either one of those 2 things are going to be like a sign, a symbol that you can darshan smuchim. But if you don't have that, you cannot darshan smuchim. All of Amud Beis is going to be going back and forth through that idea within the parsha of Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv, and then it's going to flip and start talking about Shatnez. And that's all we'll finish this out today. Says the Gemara, on the Mishnah Torah, my time Darish. Why is it that we darshan smuchim in Mishnah Torah, meaning we don't do it in the rest of the places? Either because the pasuk that we're discussing is out of place, or it's extra, and there's something about it that makes it available. Since it's extra, we'll darshan smuchim. So now the Gemara is going to go through each case. Let's use the case that we just mentioned of smuchim here of lo yigala knaf aviv. Why is it muchach that it has to be talking about your father's mistress? The imkain, because if it wouldn't be, right? Lichtave rachmana gabi arayis. This entire pasuk doesn't really belong. It's out of place. It's in Perek Chav Gimel. Why isn't it in Perek Yud Ches with the rest of the arayis and achremos? What's it doing over here? It's out of place. This is called muchach. It's out of place. Must be that it's coming to sort of say, Hashem's like giving me like a wink, wink. There's something going on over here. You can darshan smuchim. A different explanation is the mufne. Mishum de mufni. It's available, meaning to say what? The imkain, for if it were not extra, lichdav rachmana, it should have just said, lo yikach ish es eshes aviv. Lo yigala knaf aviv lamali. The existence of the pasuk, lo yigala knaf aviv, I don't need it. It can't be talking about my father's wife. That's already covered in the prior part of the pasuk. This is clearly extra. Since it's extra, I'm going to darshan it to be smuchim. Meaning, again, we only say smuchim if you have 1 or 2 of these ideas. Says the Gemara, as we turn on the base, shmamina le'afnuye. So that explains lo yigala knaf aviv, which is really irrelevant for our Gemara. What we need is the tzitzis piece, because again, we want to learn how to say the chalais to say from smuchim. So now it says the Gemara, let's go back to tzitzis, which is in devarim. But we need to see, is there also an argument to be made that it's muchach and mufna? Now, from the Gemara, it's going to seem clear that it's not either or. Normally, when we say iboy same as that, we mean either this or that. It seems from the way the Gemara is going to go, you need both. You need both muchach and mufne, because it's going to be very clear that on one of the sides of this, we're going to spend a bunch of time proving either it is extra or it's not extra. It is extra or it's not extra. And that extra, not extra, really is irrelevant, because if I have the other side of mufne, then who cares if it's extra or not? Or if I have the side of muchach, right? So it says the Gemara like this. Tzitzis nami, gabi tzitzis nami, meaning it's in devarim, and we darshan smuchim. This should work like Rabbi Yehuda, but we need to prove that it's either extra or it's out of place. So iboy seima mishum demuchach, iboy seima mishum demufna. Iboy seima mishum demuchach. How do I see that it's out of place? The imkain lichtev rachmana gabi parsha tzitzis. Why didn't the Torah write the pasuk of gedilim tasalach, which we use for smuchim? Why not write it in Parshas Shlach? What's it doing in Parshas Re'eh? Meaning it's out of place. Really, that isn't the parsha of tzitzis. There's just a random line talking about tzitzis right smack in the middle of the parsha of Shatnez. That must be because Hashem's trying to tell me something here, that the Shatnez tzitzis have an interaction that is unique, must be to tell me that you're even supposed to wear tzitzis when it's Shatnez. Why say it over here? Like I just said. A separate reason you could say that the pasuk of tzitzis and Shatnez is coming to tell me something, and you could darshan smuchim, because michli. Let's investigate over here. Because of the Torah says, this is in Parshas Achrei Ubeged kilayim Shatnez lo ya'ale alecha. This is what we're going to discuss Shatnez for the rest of the daf. All right? Ubeged kilayim Shatnez lo ya'ale alecha. You are not allowed to be ma'aleh. You're not allowed to put on any kilayim that are called Shatnez, meaning this is what we refer to as Shatnez, wool and linen. Lo silba shatnez lamali. The next part of the pasuk of don't wear shatnez, that seems to be extra, right? So here we're proving that the parsha of tzitzis and shatnez has both a out of placement. That's the first thing we said, and here we're saying there's a line within there that's completely unnecessary. This line of lo silba shatnez. What do I need it for? It's already covered in the prior pasuk or the prior statement of beged kilayim shatnez lo yalech lo ya'alecha. We already told you shatnez don't wear. So what's this business of lo silba shatnez coming to add? Lamali, I don't need it. Shmami no lafnuye. And at this point, we're good. At this point, we have an explanation for why shatnez you can darsha in the smuchim, and we have Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham saying, "I say as a raya," and really we could have ended the Gemara right here. So Gemara says, "No, you want to tell me that's mufna? That's not mufna. You're telling me that the pasuk of leisilba shatnez is extra. It's not extra. I need it. Honey, Mr. Strichi, I need that pasuk. I need both of them. The ikaz of Rahman lo ya'ala alechem. All I would have is the first pasuk. Don't place it upon you. Hav yamina kol derech ha'ala asa rachmana ve'afilu moichrech sus. If that's the only pasuk, what does the pasuk say? Don't place it upon you. I might think that that's true, even if you have zero benefit from the beged. What's the example? Let's hear a person who's you're a suit salesman. You're working in I don't know, Neiman Marcus, and you're selling boss suits, right? Boss suits have a lot of shatnez in it, right? At least that's what I remember from when I would buy boss suits. I don't buy them anymore, but I'm pretty sure boss suits used to always have a ton of shatnez in it. And you buy
It's more expensive. They're more
yeah,
expensive.
and it's because they're mixing in a lot of the materials on the inside that you can't even see, and how they make I forget the term for the build of the suit. Whatever it is, the point is you got to be careful. Wool and linen. So you might think that even a Jewish guy selling suits, if he's just putting the jacket on, he's not wearing the jacket for himself. He's just putting it on to make sure that it looks good, so that he could sell it to someone else. So that's not going to be a problem of shatnez, and it isn't. But if all I would have is the pasuk of lo ya'ale alecha. Loyale implies no matter any time, however you're putting it on, even if all you're doing is just selling it, we would call that shatnez. So therefore, kasav rachman lo silba shatnez, silbash levush implies you're wearing it. It's your beged. Why? Because dumya de levisha, the ispehana, the only time you're over on shatnez is if when you're wearing it for yourself. For some reason you want to wear it because you have some benefit from it, but not because, like for instance, if I'm just, let's say, taking the moving a blanket because I'm moving from one house to the other, and the moving blanket happens to have some shatnez in it, and I throw it over my shoulder, I'm not over on shatnez, I'm just taking it from one place to the other.
If you're aware, if you're a suit salesman, you're aware that it should have shatnez, you're permitted to sell.
Different discussion. It's an off topic. It's lifnei ivrit, but yeah, we'll talk about it after. Yeah, says the Gemara right there. It's a good question, but we'll talk about it after. Yeah, dumya de levisha de isbehana. So therefore, I need that pasuk, and therefore it's not available. It's not mufne anymore for the asay dechilas as a smuchim discussion. And the ikaz of Rachman loy silbash. And if all I would have had is the second half of the pasuk, telling me that it has to be levisha, that when you're over on shatnez and when you're wearing it. Havi Amina Dafke Levisha did Nofish Anayasa. I might think, when are you over on shatnez? Only when it's a super high level of enjoyment. I might think that, let's say you're sleeping on the couch, you want to take a blanket. That's not really Levisha. I'm not wearing it, but I'm certainly benefiting from this beged that's maybe shatnez. I'm lying on the couch with some shatnez. Maybe I might think that's mutter. So therefore I need both sukkim because of Rahman lo ya'alecha, to teach you that. So right now, where we're holding right now, we have a problem. We don't have the second half of that pasuk to be available to say this smuchim discussion. In which case, we don't have a good makor for us. Says the Gemara, you're right. Leisil b'shatnez is needed for what it said, but that should be all it says. The tzemru pishtim business, lamali. I don't need that extra piece. I don't need you to tell me it's tzemru pishtim. What do you mean? Time out. What do you mean you don't need? I need to know what tzemru. I need to know what shatnez is. Tzemru pishtim, flax and wool, right? Linen and wool. So says the Gemara, tzemru pishtim lamali. Says the Gemara, mifti. Let me explain to you why it's extra. Says the Gemara, kasav. We already have in the parsha of Achibos before. It says ubeged kilayim shatnez lo ya'ala alecha. Now it says beged. What does the word beged mean? We just translate it as it means an article of clothing. However, Utana de Beri Bishmoel, Tana de Beri Bishmoel tells us the word beged actually carries a lot of meaning with it. Hoyel v'nemru b'Torah stam begad. Many times throughout the Torah it says beged, beged, beged here in different contexts. Upirit l'cha akasav be'echad mehem tzemru pishtim. And if you take a look in Vayikra, by the parsha of Negoyim, it mentions that the Negoyim, Nigay begadim, when you have lesions in your arm, you have lesions in your house, you can also have lesions, tzaras, in your clothing. So it says over there, when it talks about your clothing, it mentions beged, it specifically says beged tzemer, beged pishtim. So it went ahead and specified what beged meant there. It meant wool and linen. So I already know that the word beged means tzemer or pishtim. So since Rabbi Yishmael, Tana Rabbi Yishmael taught me that, now when the Torah says when the Torah says "Ubeged kilayim shatnez lo ya'lo alecha," I already know that includes tzemer upishtim. So now the tzemer in the pish of the pasuk is truly extra. That's what the Gemara is explaining. Upirt la'achakasa be'echa man tzemer upishtim, af kol tzemer upishtim. So then tzemer upishtim the cause of Rachman alamali. So the Gemara is just fleshing out its point. It's extra. Shmamino lafnuya. We're back good now. We have an extra pasuk that the tzemer upishtim business is unnecessary. Says the Gemara. We're going to use from there. It must be telling me to darshan smuchim. I have a makor for asay decheles. I'm going to keep on coming back to that to really nail that home. The Akati Yitzchak says the Gemara. No. It's not extra. I need it for something else. Kasal kadai techamina. I might think that where it says beged ha'Allah hi deloy nafish hanasa avalavisha denaf hanayasa kol treimini asa rachmana. Says the Gemara as follows. We say, if I were to say to you, what is shatnez? You said it before. It's when you have a beged made of wool and linen. But what if I told you I have a beged made of cotton and a beged made of silk? Would you tell me that it's a shatnez problem? You say, no, it's no problem. Says the Gemara, I might think that had I not expressed tzemru pishtim specifically, but in the parsha where it says leisilba shatnez tzemru pishtim, I might think that when is tzemru pishtim the isser? That's only when you're like wearing a blanket. But when you're wearing clothing, when you're really benefiting from it, maybe any two materials are going to be a problem. And by the way, it's not a crazy thought because in other areas of kilayim, that is the case. We don't only say to you, for instance, when you're planting things, it can only be corn and carrots. It's any two species you're not supposed to mix together. So I might think the same thing over here. It's not just wool, it's not just linen. What about mesh? What about anything? Polyester, whatever it is. So says the Gemara, therefore I needed to say tzemru pishtim to teach me that even when you're wearing it, it's limited. It's limited to only wool and linen, even when you're wearing it. So because of Rahmana, tzemru pishtim. So Gemara says no. Tzemru pishtim is still extra. Why? Because imkein lishtach kramine. It really could have just gotten away with not saying anything. But tesi shatnez maha'ala. There's a gzeira shava from ha'ala to leisilbash. They both say the word shatnez. And I would say that just like by ha'ala, beged means tzemru pishtim, wool and linen, I'll say so too by lo silbash, it means tzemru pishtim. So therefore it's extra. Since it's extra, we have a makor for the kal v'chomer, we have the makor for the asay decheles, say by sitzis, because there's an extra word there to say smuchim. Says the Gemara. So at this point we're good. Utana de Rabbi Shmuel, time of the cause of Rahmana, tzemru pishtim, halav hochi kilayim besitzes havamina da asa Rahmana. Ask the Gemara the following question. According to Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, it seems over here that had it not been for darshaning smuchim, had it not been for this drasha that we just explained, time of the cause of Rahmana, tzemru pishtim, it's only because the Torah says tzemru pishtim. But without that, halav hochi, we wouldn't have said asay decheles, and therefore kilayim besitzes havamina da asa Rahmana. It's not. Huh? Okay.
Who's Yismach? What was it say?
Up to Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, we're good. We have an
You never had Rabbi Yismach before?
he was brought in before to explain what beged is, and that
Right.
beged means both tzemru pishtim.
Well, we saw that.
Right. So Tana de Rabbi Shmuel was a very important part of us getting to the point where we're holding smuchim.
He's the one that said beged all
Beged
over
means
means
yeah. Now that idea means, based on Rabbi Shmuel's idea, that allows us now to say smuchim that I say is the cholisas. Okay. So let's pause right there. Okay. Now the Gemara says so. It comes out that according to Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, had he not said what he said, had we not had that, then we wouldn't have asay decheles, meaning we wouldn't be allowed to wear tzitzis with wool and linen tzitzis, right? We wouldn't say asay decheles over here. Ask the Gemara, but even without Tana Rabbi Shmuel, that's not true, right? With Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, time of the cause of Rahman tzemru pishtim. It's only because of this tzemru pishtim that I can darshan smuchim. Halav hachi, had it not said tzemru pishtim, you're telling me that I would not put tzitzis on a wool tzitzis on a linen beged, meaning we wouldn't have been said asay decheles. Kilayim besitzes havamina da asa Rahmana, right? I just want to make sure we're good here. We're trying to prove Esed Dechelos. Esed Dechelos comes from Smuchim. Smuchim is built on Rabbi Shmuel saying that beged means both, and therefore, Tzemer Upishtim is available to teach me it's open to say Smuchim. So therefore, I say Dechelos.
I'm saying you don't need
The
that.
Gemara, no, one second. No, what the Gemara is saying, if that's the build is Rabbi Shmuel telling me beged means Tzemer Upishtim allows me to now say that when it actually says Tzemer Upishtim, that's extra.
That's right.
What if the implication is that if it doesn't say Tzemer Upishtim, then we're stuck? But the Gemara is saying, I'll prove to you we wouldn't be stuck. The Gemara is basically saying, what do I even need this whole business of smuchim for? I would anyways prove to you that asay is going to be dochalos asay for a different reason. And the Gemara is going to come off of this. But the Gemara is going to say, from here, it says like this. V'haksiv, the pasuk says, and this is the Gemara's attempt to say, I know that you can have wool and linen mixed together by tzitzis from a different place. The pasuk says in Shlach, V'asu lahem tzitzis al kanfei bigdeim. You're supposed to put tzitzis on the corners of your garments. The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel called begadim tzemer upishtim. And we know from Rabbi Shmuel saying that means by definition it's tzemer upishtim. And the Torah is saying that you can either have a beged made of tzemer, you can either have a beged made of pishtim, which means your beged can be made of linen. And the Torah says, and that's wool. So right then and there, you see that you can have a wool string on a linen beged. So you see, I say, you don't need to come on to smuchim. You have a much stronger drasha. Now the Gemara parenthetically just says, how do I know for sure that tchelis is wool? Umimai that tchelis imrahu. So the Gemara says, because if you look by the Big Day Kayan, which we just came off of from the last couple of weeks, we talked about there's sheish, there's argomon, there's teilas shani, there's 3 colored wools and linen, right? So the Gemara says, how do I know that sheish or the pasuk is referring to wool? He says, sorry, not sheish. How do I know that tchelis is wool? He says, because he says like this, the sheish kisna tchelis imrahu. How do I know this? No, I put the question mark in the wrong spot. The sheish kisna tchelis imrahu. It's from the fact that I know that sheish is referring to flax. In the parsha over there, imra must be wool. But what's relevant for us over here, it's not from the Gemara's lines. It's not clear. But the point is that I know it really doesn't matter. By the way, I'm saying the point is because no matter which way you go,
You know that tchelis.
you know that tchelis can. We know for sure beged means either it means flax. Beged means flax and wool, and we're not sure what tchelis means. What's the suffix? Tchelis or flax. It's either wool or flax. So either it means flax and that's wool, or that's flax and this is wool. But either way, you're putting the two together. So the point is that says the Gemara, I don't need to come on to a whole business of smuchin, da. I have it before over here. The Torah says where tzitzis. When it said where tzitzis, it said beged. Beged means flax and wool, and it says put tchelis on it, which is wool. So that means wool is going on flax. So that's an asay dechelis without smuchin. Says the Gemara, itzrich. No, that's not available. Meaning that drasha that you just wanted to say, we'll learn asay dechelis say without smuchim. I have a svara of Rava, a drasha of Rava. I would have thought to learn. What's drasha of Rava? The Rava Rami. Rami means he had a steer, he had a contradiction. What's the contradiction? Ksiv haknaf, right? We know we say it every day in Shema. Hakanaf pesil techelis, right? Hakanaf. He says it means min kanaf, meaning to say that it has to be from the same type of material. Uksiv temru pishnim, but then it says that the beged can be made of wool and linen. Hakeitzad, how do you put the two together? So he says as follows. It must be that if the strings, tzemer, upishtim, potrin, bein b'minan, bein shaloi b'minan, you could take tzemer and you could put it on anything else. You could take pishtim, you could put it on anything else, meaning a beged made of any other material. Cotton, let's say. Shar minin, b'minan, potrin, shaloi b'minan, ein potrin. So Rava has a drasha. Rava's drasha basically says that you can put a wool string on any other type of beged. You could put a linen string on any other type of beged, but if you're going to use a cotton string, it can only go in a cotton beged. If you're going to use a mesh string, you can only go in a mesh beged, right? So the Gemara is saying what? The Gemara is saying
It's not available.
so it's not available. I have it for some other drasha, right? And since it's not available, I can't darshan it. The Gemara says 1 second, but that's Rava. We're talking about Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel less lay the Rava. So the Gemara says you're right, because again, Rava holds that the tzitzis has to be from if it's not wool or linen, it has to be from the same mid. Rabbi Shmuel has no problem. He
doesn't agree with that.
Right, he doesn't agree with that at all. He says you could do anything. You can put one on the other. It doesn't make a difference. The Gemara says it's Rav. You're right. He doesn't hold of Rava, but the diuk of Rava is a good diuk, meaning to say he'll darshan it as follows: Hakanaf min knaf tells Yivachi kam Rachmana. Ovid leitzemer letzemer upishnim lepishnim. I might think that Rabbi Shmuel would then learn that tzemer only works with tzemer, pishnim only works with pishnim. V'ki avidas tzemer letzemer tzave. When do you put tchelas on? Only when it's wool, and when do you not put tchelas on? Avol tzemer lepishnim, with pishnim letzemer lo. So therefore, you can't say asay decheles say from that parsha. Therefore, you need to come on to the fact that there's an extra word of tzemer upishnim. So, because of Rahman, tzemer upishnim, tafilu tzemer upishnim, upishnim tzemer to tell me that there's a mitzvah sitzis, afal pi that it's going to be a problem of shatnas. Meaning to say what? Smuchim. Because we darshan smuchim, we can say asay decheles say. A little bit complicated as working it out exactly in the Gemara, but just high level. What did we just do? We introduced the concept called asay decheles say, and we said why should it have been that by your wife's sister you would have been able to be with her? She's an erva because that's asay decheles say. Says the Gemara. We only say that by a regular lo say, not by a lo say sheish by karas. Park that question. We'll get back to it on Dav Zayin. Second question: where do I even know asay decheles say from? The Gemara says I know it from shatnas and tzitzis juxtaposed. Juxtaposed isn't the thing. If juxtaposed is a thing, then there are many halachas we can learn. Says the Gemara, no, I'll prove to you it's a thing because both the Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda, although Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say smuchin, a juxtaposition is worked throughout the rest of the Torah, in Dvarim he does, and the Gemara just goes back and forth, proving that shatnez and tzitzis is mufna and muchach and available for us to darshan smuchim, so that we can ultimately say aseh deichilois aseh is going to work for mitzvahs tzitzis with shatnez. Now, this is
Mufna and muchach again. What does it mean?
muchach means that
Ready?
it's
Muchach?
literally the words muchach means it's proof. Muchach means it's got to be. It's muchach like that. It's got to be. But muchach in the context of the Gemara means that contextually it doesn't belong where it is. So obviously the Torah is giving me a sign. Read it special. And the other one, mufna, means there's something extra there. When there's something extra, that's also a way of Hashem saying, investigate over here. Now, just quickly, as we introduce it in tomorrow's Gemara, we have a shorter daf a little bit, thank God. So on Shabbos it'll go fast. But asay deichilos is a huge Shas topic. I just want to say one idea. We said before that asay is being docha los asay. Asay is the mitzvah's essay. The los essay is a lav. You can't push the essay off of the lav. We're going to see in the Gemara back and forth again. We'll see what does it mean when we say the asay is docha the los asay. But come back to Yevamos for a second. Where did we say? We said the asay of Yibam will be docha the lav of kares. That works wonderful for the man. He has a mitzvah Yibam. So he has a heter to go have that sex, let's say. But the woman, there's no mitzvah Yibam for a woman. So what heter does she have to have that act? That's a big question. Meaning, I have a heter Yibam. So my mitzvah Yibam will push off my avera of bia with this lady. She has no mitzvah Yibam. It's my mitzvah. I have the mitzvah asay to be docha the los asay. She doesn't have a mitzvah asay of Yibam.
Right.
So both people are
Yes, absolutely. They both have the avera, but they both don't have the mitzvah.
Guys, have a good Shabbos.
Have a great day. Have a great Shabbos.
don't tell the feminists.
All right, we did. Today was better. Still a little long.